In Luke 2:52, we read, Jesus grew in wisdom, in stature, in favor with God and man. And when we look at that, it was written about Jesus as a child. And it helps us get a picture of what child development should be. Jesus was human. He grew as every child should. And so when we think of these four ways, he grew in wisdom, we think about cognitive or mental development. In stature, obviously, is the physical development. In favor with God is spiritual development, and favor with man is the social and emotional development. Every child develops in certain ways and certain patterns as they grow in these areas. And understanding how children grow helps us know how best to minister to children in those areas. So we're going to take a look at how children grow according to some of the theorists who have talked about child development. If you think about physical development, children all develop in the same way. You notice as babies, they're very helpless. They have no muscle control or skill. But as they begin to grow, first they can hold up their heads, then they begin to move around. They learn to roll over, they learn to sit, they learn to crawl, stand, walk, and then they learn the finer motor skills of catching things and running and jumping and all the things that are part of physical development. We're not going to look so much at that. We want to look more at the other ways that children grow. And I want to begin by thinking about how children grow mentally or cognitively. One of the foremost theorists in this area is Jean Piaget. And he studied children and looked at the way they differed in how they processed things in their mind when trying to understand information. And so he looked at young children, kind of preschool children, and then school-age children. When he looked at children that are 0 to 2 years old, he says these children are in what he calls the sensory motor phase or stage of development. That means everything they're learning is coming in through their senses. You know how babies are. They like to touch everything. And then usually they want to put it in their mouth because they're just learning to explore the world through what they hear, what they see, what they taste, and what they touch. Everything is about the senses. They don't necessarily understand it yet, but they want to learn about the world that is outside of themselves. A part of the growing in this area is where they learn how to think of things as separate from themselves, or that things that they cannot see still exist. All of us play peekaboo with children, and a small child, when we would cover our eyes, would think we're gone. And then when we open up and say peekaboo, they're like, oh, she's back. But as children begin to develop cognitively, they begin to realize, oh, you're still there even if I can't see you. And that's what's happening in the first 2 years of a child's life. Once a child hits 2 years old, and then up till 5, 6, 7 years old, they are in what Piaget calls the pre-operational stage. So they're not just touching and feeling things, they're beginning to think about things. This is where language is developing, and so a child learns to say, that thing over there is a cat, or that is a ball. They're putting language together with the things that they see around them. So this is the beginning of operational thought, is what they call. At this time, they are very egocentric. They tend to see everything revolves around me. So if a child hits another child, and the mother says, so how did you think that feel? The child looks at their fist and they go, oh, that felt pretty good. They have no concept of how the other person might feel. They're just thinking about themselves. And that's part of the development, especially in 2, 3, 4-year-olds. As they get a little bit older, they begin to see that there's perspectives of other people. They take everything literally. So if we say something like, Jesus is my rock, the child will look on the driveway and look at a rock and say, is that Jesus? Because they're putting those concrete words with what they imagine the object to be. They can't think abstractly yet. In terms of how they interact with others, they, at the younger age, don't really like to play together. They like to play beside one another. They may watch others play and do whatever they're doing, but they don't necessarily begin to interact yet. This happens as they get a little bit older and they begin to do more imaginative or pretend play, where they begin acting out the roles that they see around them. You be the daddy, I'll be the mummy. You go to work, I'll be working on the farm. They will act out to help them understand what is their role in the world and to make sense of the things that they're seeing. So this is what happens in the pre-operational stage. Once a child becomes around 7 years old, they enter what we call the concrete operational stage. So Piaget says this is when children begin to develop logic. Preschoolers don't really have any logic, or whatever logic they have makes no sense to anyone else. But once they get school age, they begin to think of things, but in concrete terms. They have a hard time understanding things like object lessons, where an object represents somewhere else, something else. And so instead, they're trying to look at things very concretely. They look at an instance and they say, well, because this is true in this instance, then I can apply it to other instances. So if mom tells me not to touch the cat in the house, I shouldn't touch the cat outside as well. Children at this age also take a look at how people think differently from them. So they're beginning to understand that the way I think and the way other people think are different, and to begin to understand perspectives that are other than their own. So they're not just receiving information and taking it in anymore, they're starting to consider what other people think as well. Their language is growing leaps and bounds at this time. Their mental capacity is huge. By the time a child becomes 11, 12 years old, and then into adulthood, they begin what we call the formal operations stage. That means they are beginning to think about things abstractly, so they can understand concepts. They don't just understand stories and real things. They begin to think about ideas or theories. They begin to question a lot more. They begin to wonder, how does this make sense in my life? They begin to think, what difference does this make to know it for me or for my situation? They also begin to use deductive logic. So they can take a general principle that they learn in school or in church and say, okay, because this is a principle, this is the rule, this is how I can apply it to my specific situation. So you see, their ways of presenting or understanding or logic changes from childhood into adolescence. And so this is what Piaget says is part of the cognitive way of developing. We also read in Luke 2:52 that Jesus grew in favor with men. And so this is talking about the social or emotional kind of development. Erik Erikson, who's one of the foremost theorists in this area, developed a theory of psychosocial development. And what he suggested is that throughout our lives, we go through a series of development in our emotional and social skills. If we navigate it successfully, we can move on, we develop. And if we don't, we're going to struggle in that area for the rest of our lives. And so when we look at children, it begins in the area, in the first 18 months of the child's life, trust versus mistrust. When a child is born, they're completely dependent upon their caregiver, their parent, for their needs. So when a child cries because they're hungry, they're distressed, they need to be changed, the caregiver comes, the parent comes, and takes care of the need. If the caregiver does care for those needs, the child learns to trust that person, that when I'm crying, someone's going to come and take care of me. But if the child is neglected, if the parent is not there or ignores them, the child does not learn to trust. And that fundamental part of relationship building is lost. And we see this happen in so many children that are in orphanages or in homes where they are taken from the home and put into foster care, where the child does not develop the ability to trust or to attach to their caregiver. And this all happens in the first 18 months of a child's life. Once a child turns 1 or 18 months up into age 3, they move into Erikson's second stage, which he calls autonomy versus shame. People know the terrible twos and how they say everything is me, mine, or no. And the idea of this is part of the child is developing their sense of who I am, that I'm separate from my mother or my father. I'm separate from the people and the things around me, and that I'm learning to do things myself. And so if a child successfully navigates this, they learn autonomy, or they learn to be independent as a person. And if not, if the parents don't allow them to do these things, they begin to develop a sense of shame and a sense of doubt, and it keeps them from wanting to try more things. When a child successfully navigates this, they're going to feel secure, they'll feel confident in themselves versus feeling shame. Once a child becomes around 3 years of age until 6 years of age, they enter Erikson's third stage. He says this is the time of initiative versus guilt. These children are busy. They want to try things. They're learning how to do so many things as a preschooler, and they want to have success in doing this. If we nurture that and we help them take initiative and encourage them to try, they'll keep developing it. However, if parents don't allow them to, or really put them down or shame them down, they're going to feel this guilt, and it's going to lead to them having a sense of self-guilt, of the sense that I can't do it, and so I'm not even going to try. And so all of these feelings are being developed in a child before they even go to school. So the sense of shame, or the sense of confidence, the sense of ability to do something and initiate, versus the sense of being guilty that I can't do it, is all done in preschool years. So the development of a child's social emotional life is very critical in those early years of his or her life. Erikson's fourth stage is what he calls industry versus inferiority. And this happens to children between the ages of 6 and 12, basically the primary school years. This is where they're really they're learning a lot, they're learning skills, they're becoming better at doing things, and they want to become good at it. They are busy people, and they want to be recognized as being competent, or that they're able to do it, or encouraged to try. And as they do this, they will begin to believe that they can do things. They will see, I have industry, I am capable. If they don't receive that kind of encouragement and opportunity, they begin to feel a sense of inferiority. So they begin to doubt that they can be successful in things. It begins to impact their self-worth and can cause them to just pull back and not want to do things or try new things because they've sensed failure or incompetence in their lives. The stage that goes into adolescence is what Erikson calls the identity versus confusion. We all hear stories about teenagers and trying to figure out, who am I? And Erikson recognizes this. They've been growing in skills, but as they hit puberty, 13 through 18 years old, they're coming to a place in their lives of trying to understand, who am I? Who am I in relationship to others? Do I have an identity? What is my place of belonging? If they are successful in navigating through understanding this socially and emotionally, they emerge with a very strong sense of their self-image, of their self-worth, their feeling of independence. But if they don't navigate it well, they'll emerge with that sense of deep insecurity. They will be confused about who they are and their relationships with others around them. So we see how throughout a child's growth, physical growth and age development, they are also developing in their favor with man, or social emotionally. Another theorist who looked at the development of children was Lawrence Kohlberg, but he actually looked at moral development. And moral is, how do you develop a sense of what is right and what is wrong? And Kohlberg found there were some ways that we saw along child development lines, but some adults actually are as simple as children in the way they determine what is right and wrong. Let me explain what I mean. Kohlberg suggested that at the lowest level is what he calls pre-conventional morality. And this is what we often see in preschoolers. They kind of think of, something is right if I don't get punished for it. Something is wrong if I do get punished for it. So their sense of right and wrong is, will I be punished for what I've done? And it's not necessarily thinking about the action itself, but just what is going to be the reaction from the people who are over me or in authority over me. Or as they get a little bit older, they might think right and wrong is, well, if I can get some kind of a reward, then that's what's right. And so children will often do something to get a sticker or to get a sweet or something like that, and they think that's right because I got a prize for doing the right thing. So for a preschooler, right and wrong is dependent upon what is going to help them. They will avoid punishment, so they'll be good to avoid the punishment, or they'll be good so that they can get some kind of a gift from others. That's pre-conventional morality. The next level that Kohlberg talks about is what he calls conventional morality. It's a step up because it's trying to fit into conventions of the society around them. So there are children who would think, I'm going to do this because I want to be a good girl, or I want to be a good boy. It's not just about getting the reward, but they feel like there's pressure. It could be from their parents or from their friends or their classmates at school. I will do this because this is what a good boy or a good girl should do, and they want to be good. And sometimes it's the opposite. They choose, I want to be a bad boy because there's pressure for me to be bad. So they will choose what's right and wrong depending upon how other people feel or how other people treat them. If they expand or grow a little bit more, they begin to do what Kohlberg calls authority and maintaining the social order, which means they follow the rules. As children move especially into school and into the primary school age, they think about, we need to follow the rules. We find especially younger elementary or primary school kids, they're very strict on being fair and keeping the rules because that's what you should do. And so they've moved up to conventional morality in terms of understanding. Some kids are very good at following the rules. Some children decide, is the rules good for me, or can I bend them or stretch them a little bit? That's dependent a little bit on their personality. But the morality of what's right and wrong is, what do the rules say? The rules at school, the rules at home, the rules of the land. So to sum it up, what is right is what is just and fair for everyone. And God is like maybe the divine scorekeeper, keeping track of who's doing right and who's doing wrong, and hopefully you're doing more right than you're doing wrong. And so if you get rewarded, that's a great thing for a child of this age. There are higher levels of moral development, but they are usually reserved for people that are into teenage and adult years. You can look them up and read about them on your own. The four that I've mentioned, or the two main areas, the pre-conventional and conventional morality, are pretty much what we see in all children. Well, from the scripture in Luke 2:52, the last way we see that children grow is in favor with God. And I mean, that's not that it's the least, but spiritual development is also a way of development for children. And there are several theorists who have looked at development of children, but one of the ones we're going to look at is John Westerhoff, who takes a little bit different approach than some of these stages like this. Westerhoff looks at the younger ages as being experienced faith. And he says for young children, especially preschoolers, he says faith is caught. It's not taught. They're learning all about faith from their parents, from their families, from the people who are close around them. They will imitate what they see their families do or what they see happening in church. You see how the little 2-year-old will close their eyes and put their hands together for praying because they see everybody else doing that. And so they're learning the activities of faith, even though they may not really understand who God is. Children begin to get a concept of God because they've learned to love and trust their parents. And so when their parents talk about God, they go, oh, well, I can love and trust God because I can love and trust my mother and father. And so the rituals and the symbols of faith are enjoyed by the child, even though they may not fully understand them at this time. But what they begin to do is be given words. They might have this awe and wonder of the world around them, but they begin to get language to put words to what they're experiencing and seeing that this is God. It's not just something that's happening in the world around me. That's experienced faith. Once a child hits around school age, 6, 7 years old, they begin to experience what we call affiliative faith, which means I belong to something. I'm affiliated with something. For children in the school age years, they're really excited about belonging to the church, being part of this community, of learning the stories of God's big story and being a part of God's big story in their own lives. They love learning about heroes of faith and how they can be like those heroes in the Bible. Whereas preschoolers think of everything as kind of imaginary, the world is wonderful and beyond their understanding. This age group is looking at the real life and beginning to make applications of what they learn from the Christian community and from the Word of God to their own lives, trying to make sense of it. And so the faith stories are really critical to help them understand the journey and how God fits into life. Once a child hits puberty, 12, 11, 12, 13 years old, that child begins to move into what we often call searching faith. And maybe you've experienced it yourself when you got to your adolescent years where you're kind of like, well, this is what my parents believe, but do I really believe that myself? And what these children do is they begin to search. They may doubt, they may ask questions, trying to understand how God fits into their world, and do they want to believe in it for themselves? This is often a time where children make a deeper commitment to Christ, or maybe turn away from whatever their parents have taught them about God or about the church. They become less reliant on the faith community. They tend to lean more upon their friends, their peers around them. And they might have criticism of what they've experienced when they were in younger years. But a part of this journey, and it happens for some faster than others, is what Westerhoff calls owned faith. They begin to own it. They come to a point of saying, this was my parents' faith, this was my church faith, but you know what? I see now that this is my faith too. Jesus is real for me. God is real, and I want to follow him. And so this may happen in adolescence. This may not happen until they're in adulthood. But this is the journey that Westerhoff has seen happening as people develop in their faith journeys. So we see from all of these theorists that children grow. As they grow up, they're growing mentally, they're growing physically, they're growing emotionally, they're growing morally, and they're growing spiritually. And each one of these is like a facet of who the child is. We cannot only look at one of those facets. It's like that story of the 6 blind men and the elephant, where every blind man was touching a different part of the elephant. One says, oh, an elephant is like a wall because he was feeling the side of the elephant. The other said, no, it's like a fan because he was touching the ear of the elephant. Another said, no, it's like a tree because he was touching the leg of the elephant. All of the men were touching the elephant, but they were only looking or experiencing a certain perspective of that elephant. What they needed to do was see the whole thing. And that's what we need to remember as we work with children. We need to see our children as whole beings. They are physical, they are spiritual, they are emotional, they are social, and they are cognitive beings. And as we seek to minister to them, we want to minister to them holistically in every area of their development as God created them to be.